This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest for this episode of the podcast really doesn't need an introduction because everyone knows who you are, Matt Brynildson, brewmaster for Firestone Walker.
Pleasure to be here.
It's ever since we started this podcast back in 2017, it's like, gosh, I need to get Matt on the podcast. And it's like, are we ready for that? Are we ready? So, here we are in 2020 in the fourth year of the podcast, and we're finally having a conversation. You really don't need any introduction, Matt. By my count, 54 GABF medals since 2002, 25 of those being gold with Firestone Walker, 9 before that at SLO Brewing before the Firestone and Walker bought it, 28 World Beer Cup medals, 13 of which are gold, 2 of those or 2 more from SLO. I mean, that's a crazy, incredible record that you've got there. I will say that I have felt privileged to and have the good fortune to get to know you and spend time with you over the years at our Craft Beer and Brewing Brewers retreats up at Devil's Thumb Ranch, also in your home in Paso Robles at Firestone Walker, doing everything from blending the 21st anniversary beer to coming and being there for the last number of Firestone Walker invitationals. Anyway, it's exciting to have you on the podcast, Matt.
Jamie, thanks for having me. It's good to finally be here.
Yeah, why did it take so long? I know, right?
Well, it's because we've spent so much good time together. You mentioned the Colorado event, and I can't think of anything cooler. I hope that comes back around again. I mean, getting a number of us kind of professional brewers to tackle a homebrew kit. That was amazing. I remember it snowing while we were brewing outdoors in Colorado in the Rockies. It was insane.
It's an extreme brewing. There was that first year that we did it, we had no idea what it was going to be like. And I remember when Stephen Powell's from Boulevard came in, he looked at this brew system, and it was a little, like one barrel Ruby Street system. He's like, I've never brewed on anything less than like a 30 hectoliter brew system. But it was amazing how competitive and into it you all got. Yeah.
I felt the same way. I'm like, oh man, it's been a while since I homebrewed. You trust me with this thing? But no, it was awesome. It was such a great event.
Well, we were going to take the year off in 2020 anyway and didn't plan an event. And turns out that was the smartest possible strategy given that everything got canceled in 2020. But I'll tell you, after this past year of social isolation, and I agree with you. I think we have to bring it back.
Yeah.
So maybe 2022 is the year when the Brewers retreats make a return. Nonetheless, and I digress, we should get into talking about brewing. Before we do, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. New this year, redundancy meets efficiency. G&D's micro-channel condensers are built with all aluminum construction, which eliminates galvanic corrosion. Using half the refrigerant of conventional condensers with fewer brazed connections translates to a lower GWP and less opportunity for leaks. Call G&D Chillers today to discuss your project or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by Rahr North Star Pils, a new base malt to set your compass by. Rahr North Star Pils is crafted for brewers looking for a domestic Pilsner malt with low color and no modification. North Star Pils carries overtones of honey and sweetbread, supported by flavors and aromas of hay and a nutty character. Suitable for any beer style, but particularly craft brewed versions of classic lagers. Let Rahr North Star Pils guide your craft by visiting bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2730. 9. For those of you who are Craft Beer and Brewing subscribers out there, subscribers to the magazine, Matt is going to be writing some stories for the next 4 issues of the magazine, starting in our June-July issue. Excited to have you on board for that, Matt, and all access subscribers will later this year get to see some classes in our online education program, coupled with Matt and then with some other some rock stars over at the Firestone Walker operation. So excited to be putting together some fun content with you all in 2021.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So Matt, we normally kick off the podcast with this, history and background and brewing arc, and we've written about yours multiple times in the magazine. If people want to read your pick 6, it's in issue number 1 of Craft Beer and Brewing. If people want to learn about your strategy for blending, that's issue number 2 of Craft Beer and Brewing from 2014. Over the years, we've certainly tapped into your brewing brain a whole bunch of times, and so. But you just recently had a pretty remarkable year, and a difficult year all around for everybody. You had already made plans to take off to Europe for, and take advantage of Firestone Walker's relationship with Duvel, and tell us about that and that kind of experience.
Yeah, so I've been with the company the better part of 20 years, and boy, time flies. And it's already been at least 5 years since we partnered with Duvel, and that also is a relationship that probably started. I was thinking about this the other day. I probably met Hedwig Neven, the brewmaster at Duvel, somewhere between 2001, right about the time I started at Firestone, and 2003, because it was either first when he judged a World Beer Cup or when a few of us took our first epic Belgian tour, which was John Mallett, Fal Allen from Anderson Valley, Jen Talley, who was at Squatters at the time, I think Chris Bird, who was the registrar at Siebel. All of us jumped on a plane and did one of those, headbanger tours where we hit, 3 breweries a day and just, tore it up in Belgium, just saw everything because at least I hadn't been there for that type of an experience. And we did visit Duvel on that trip. And it was also the perfect timing was that it was the Belgian celebration, brewer celebration in the Grand Place in Brussels. So we then went with Hedwig as our kind of host to this brewers only tasting at the Grand Place. Again, this is back in 2003, and my mind is just blown. Every beer is poured in its proper glass. The brewmaster standing there. I was just like, it was one of those pinch me moments. I pretty much could have ended my brewing career at that moment. And that was when I met Hedwig. And all of us have continued to have, continue communicating with and seeing Hedwig whenever we go over. So long and the short of it, I knew Hedwig well. I like to give David Walker crap that, when Michel Morgat first came to tour the brewery, he called me first because that was his connection through Hedwig. So yeah, and then when the partnership came about, when Duvel bought into Firestone Walker, one of the first things I said was, "Hey, now that this is going down and we have this incredible resource, I want to take and spend some serious time in Europe." Of course, I've always wanted to, kind of live or at least spend some extended time in Europe. So, and they were right away. They're like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Shared experience. We'll make that happen." And really, it was up to me to get everything set, quote unquote, on autopilot back here in Paso Robles to afford me the ability to kind of leave the good ship Firestone Walker for a full year and head over. I moved my family. I've got 2 young kids, and we moved the entire family over to Antwerp, which is about 25 or 30 minutes north of Brynildson, where the brewery is in Purs. And kind of immersed myself in it.
What, now it wasn't just a year-long vacation. Obviously, you've taken the family over there. Were you engaging in brewing learning, brewing teaching? How did you, focus the time that you were spending there?
It was a really nice mix. I think fortunately, I think when I first got there, I was a little disappointed that I wasn't being assigned like to a particular department or, a shift, so to speak. Because I really wanted to get on the floor and do as much as I could. But that turned out to be a blessing because I was really allowed to not only roam what I call the mothership, the Duvel Brewery, the main brewery, but of course they have other breweries in Belgium. No two are the same. In fact, they're all just radically different. So I got to spend some time at the Liefmans Brewery, and that's of course where more of the sour beer production. North Flanders, or I guess you call it West Flanders sour beer production. Spent some time right in Antwerp at De Koning, which is a really cool brewery that I had visited again on that initial trip. And then Duvel had since taken ownership of that brewery. And then Schoof, which is in the Ardennes, a completely, other end of Belgium. They speak French there, and everywhere else they're speaking Dutch as their primary language. And most of the people in North Belgium speak English as well. And the further south you get, the more it's just French. So it's a little trickier down there. And a lot of breweries in between. But I guess to get to the point, my first task was to just learn as much as I could, just immerse myself, spend as much time walking the floor of these breweries, seeing how beer is made, and helping out wherever I could.
Sure. So are you helping them brew hoppy beers and West Coast American style beers or hazy IPAs, as that case might be? Or were you spending time learning about Belgian style beers? Or was it simply looking at production methods, production brew houses, understanding the ways that things are being accomplished and, looking at that kind of process?
There's so many sharp people managing those breweries and we had already had so much, interfacing prior to that. So, it wasn't like I was going there to, teach the ways of the West Coast IPA or the hazy IPA. Most of them had been exposed to that. But I did certainly help out with some projects. A handful of them I can mention. They do a barrel-aged beer every year. And in fact, Jim Crooks went over early on and helped with some of the initial larger barrel projects that Duvel took on, and the main one being barrel-aged Duvel. And this year, we switched it up to rum barrels. So got involved in, working with the crew. I just kind of naturally gravitated to that project, of course, and got to see it all the way through. We racked the barrels early on when I first arrived, and we were present when the beer was finally packaged. So that was pretty cool to see that project all the way through from, brew house production all the way through to finished packaging. There were some other cool projects, some collaboration projects that then resulted in some learning. I think, there's always this curiosity how to bring kind of, what's happening, what's cutting edge in craft into, this 100+ year old brewery, and do it in such a way that it's not, twisting up the work, so to speak, and still speaks to their customer base. Duvel's enough for one brand there, but if you dig into their portfolio, they have a broad portfolio. There already is a West Coast Session IPA. There's, a West Coast IPA in the portfolio. They do the wit beer really well, of course. They have Abbey beers. They make, obviously Belgian Golden, and then the other brewery. So, their portfolio spans such an incredible number of beers. There's not too many stones unturned. And, we talked a lot about how do you integrate kind of like, hazy IPA and some of the character of that into a Belgian beer and then present that to, Duvel drinkers in a way that they're going to understand. And I think at the end of it, it's always it's in a fusion. I talk about it like being this pendulum. You'd like to see it swing way out, but the truth is going to lie somewhere in between. So the second half of my stay, because after COVID hit and we were all kind of hunkering down, I was able to actually spend a bunch of time on the pilot facility there. And they have this gorgeous new pilot facility, same type of brew house that we have in Venice. It's a Casper Schultz 10 hectoliter. And there I did brew some crazy kind of, hazy IPA style stuff, brought some different yeasts in, used the same recipe, used their yeast. And it was perfect because we're on site and people could taste it at its peak of freshness and kind of understand the process. So that was really cool.
Nice, nice. Talk to me a little bit about the challenge of leaving Firestone Walker for a year. Getting it set up to where, now you're not disappearing. You're still on the radar in general. You can still answer questions and you're still there to help. But how do you prep a brewery the size of Firestone Walker with staff that, depend on you for you to take a year and be in Europe for that year?
Man, that's a great question. And I'm just so fortunate, and Firestone is so fortunate to have this, dedicated core group that, now is the managing staff that all started as entry-level brewers and stuck around, that are running the plant. And, I could run through all the names, but suffice it to say that, my core kind of, my team of 7, I like to call them, the managers of all the departments of the brewery, have been with me long enough that I feel like we're practically hardwired. And so when and if something goes wrong, the answer is always the same across the board. And I mean, there were some little things. I mean, there's some things that you always have done that, had to be passed on. Actually, a lot of that was passed on to Ollie Razi, and that might not be a name that's familiar to everybody out there, but Ollie's been here for more than a decade. Started as just a Cal Poly intern, which is the local university here, food science student, worked in the lab for a while, worked his way up through the lab, wanted to brew, worked his way up through the brew house and cellars, became the head of cellar, wanted to learn production management. It was just one of those super curious, brewers that was just always wanting to learn. And now he's director of production. I mean, the guy is doing pretty much everything that I would have otherwise been doing. And, same goes for, Dustin Krull, who's a name that's probably more familiar with everybody. Has been a brewer here forever, is the head brewer in charge of brew house operations, just rock solid. And he and I, we finish each other's sentences half the time in terms of, how do you want to change this recipe? Yep, you're right. And so some of it's just time, right? I mean, we all have been working together for so long. And, some of it's just that exercise in, I wouldn't use the word trust. It's just, it was something I had to do to make this happen. And I highly recommend it, especially to anybody who's been, kind of burrowed into their brewery for, extended period of time, 10 plus years. Like I said, I've been here almost 20 years. It's really refreshing to be able to step away from a while, and really rewarding to see it operate so smoothly when you're not around.
Now, there's also that kind of ego risk when you do this, that if things do continue to operate just fine without you, there are certain folks that can't handle that and that need to be needed. And so how, from your perspective, do you balance that, wanting the team to be able to operate without you, but also needing to have a role and a voice in this, and put your own stamp on what Firestone Walker does?
I suppose maybe there is some, professional risk there. I didn't see it that way, because I guess I've looked at, and then this isn't just in a brewery, but I've looked at, a good manager delegates and trusts and teaches. I'm probably not the world's best teacher, but I like to teach. I like to give that information and empower people to make good decisions. And honestly, and I think there's a lot of brewers out there who can relate to this. When your brewery's growing really fast, it's just a survival. It's part of survival to bring people up along with you, or just, even if you're not bringing them up, just throw them the responsibility and let them carry it, or else you'll drown, and especially in more recent times, since 805 was launched, this brewery was growing so quickly that if we didn't develop our management team, delegate and trust our teammates, we weren't going to be able to do what we needed to do. And I probably would have been out of a job back then, right? So, and maybe this was the ultimate test of that. But honestly, I think everybody on this team was well situated to handle it long before I left. I was probably just me getting my head together and getting out of here, as much as anything.
Well, it says a lot that you built a team and help everyone at Firestone Walker was able to help build a team that was capable of doing that, and and I'm sure they're all happy to have you back, even if they could operate.
Well, I try to be a
absence.
nice guy, so at least I'm a good guy to have around.
Right.
Another thing that I'm so proud of about the way we've built the team is that now I'm not even involved as much or at all really in entry level brewery hiring or lab personnel or packaging. Each one of the managers of those departments is responsible to bring on their own team members. And we've really built a system because we're running, essentially 24/7 that, with a good qualified candidate, we can put her or him on the floor or in whatever department we have, and that team should bring them up. It isn't one of those like only the manager can teach you how to do it. It's really like kind of, immerse yourself with the team and the team will teach you, and everyone takes a lot of pride in what they do. That's taken a long time to develop, but it makes I feel like this is a really good learning brewery. We still have all the elements of when we were a 10,000 barrel a year brewery with hoses and tri-clamps and, all these kind of funky things, rolling pumps. And then we have really heavily automated systems. And, I think a young brewer or a young lab technician or a young packaging technician can come in and kind of see just how it all works. They can see the manual end of it, and then they can look at a screen and figure out how to drive this thing through automation. So I think we've, inadvertently built a really good learning brewery. So, and we also have Cal Poly, again, I mentioned that before, but we've got this great university locally that has a really incredible food science, engineering, agricultural curriculum. And their policy is learn through doing. So a lot of the students that come out of there have usable skills. And I'm always just so amazed. We bring these Cal Poly students out, throw them on the floor, and they know how to do it. I feel like when I got out of my undergrad and all the book smarts, and then I was just kind of, struggling to figure out how to put it to use.
Sure. The world of craft beer is a different place now. Margins are more important than ever, so why not lower your ingredient cost? Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are the cost-effective solution for your fruit-forward needs. Old Orchard produces high volumes of their retail juice brand, so economies of scale keep prices low for their bulk supply program. A little concentrate goes a long way, and you won't lose some of it through filtering like you would with purees. To start increasing your margins now, head on over to www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, BreweryDB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information and responsible for mapping millions of visits to breweries all across the United States. In early 2021, BreweryDB will reveal a whole new platform with all new marketing features for breweries to attract craft lovers to their unique brewery experience. To take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of BreweryDB and to increase your taproom traffic, visit marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. We can talk a little more at the end of the podcast because I want to delve into some things. It is the 25th anniversary of Firestone Walker, and I think there are, some key moments along the way that have been kind of pivotal for the business. But let's leave that for kind of reflection towards the end. In the short run, last week, everyone respects your experience and knowledge of hops. Last week was Hops Growers America's annual conference. I know you were actively involved in that. Sounds like you were even honored by the group with as one of the very small number of brewers to ever receive an Order of the Hop commendation. But after that week of being immersed in what's going on in the hops market now, what were some of your big takeaways, and what are some of the things that you're excited about this coming year, and some of the things that may throw a few concerns up on your radar?
Well, I think first and foremost, having attended this conference now for over 10 years, and, so my limited perspective, but in that window of time, I can tell you that the Hop Growers America, the organization, the I don't know how many growers we have total in the country, but let's say the 80 or 90 core growers that are producing 90+% of the hops are, I feel, as healthy, strong, connected as they ever have been. And I think that has to do with, a large part, the craft brewing industry wanting to engage with hop growers, and hop growers in turn receiving that information. I think when the first time I went to a Hop Growers of America conference, I felt like a real outsider. And I think these hop growers were looking at us brewers going, what are you guys doing here? This isn't your conference, And we were just happy to be there and be fly on the walls and listen to some of the conversations that are going on. Now the brewer element of this conference, there could very well be as many brewers that show up for these things when it's a physically attended event. This one was online, of course. And I worried about that initially, like, hey, are we swamping out their networking opportunity? But I feel like the vast majority of them have really embraced that opportunity and are proud. Just like any brewer, these hop growers are so proud of the product that they make. They're multi-generational farms. They take this all so seriously, and there's some really great exchange from the brewer's perspective. It's a great educational piece. Do I think every brewer needs to be there? No, but I think it's good for these brewers to attend once in a while, or to pay attention to what happens there. There's some materials that drop afterwards, like the stat report. I think that's something that every brewer should make sure they have access to, and that's through the HGA website. I think you could get into the weeds a little bit, like, do we have a balanced portfolio out there? There's probably, we went crazy planting Citra and Mosaic. Is there more in the ground than there should be? I don't know. I don't think that everybody was showing their cards completely. There's a lot of hops in warehouses, but that's a good thing for the industry to a point. Price stabilization seems to be happening a little bit more. And I think most importantly, most brewers are feeling, and I could be a little bit off here, but from my perspective, it seems like most brewers seem to have better access to the varieties they need now, maybe better than ever. And then there's always these little world events, like there was this awful hailstorm in New Zealand that stripped a bunch of hops off the vine, and that's going to have an impact, at least in this growing season. There were the wind events of last year, that had an impact on Azacca and some other key varieties. But that's going to happen every year. I think my takeaway is super positive, honestly. And I feel like, so also as part of the Hop Growers of America Hop Quality Group, which is a small organization, non-for-profit. There's between 46 and 50 breweries now in Hop Quality Group. We're celebrating our 10th year as an organization. We always show up for this as well because it's an opportunity for us to kind of meet with key people in the industry, but also meet as a group. I feel Hop Quality Group also is feeling really good. We had a transition. John Mallett stepped down as president. Alec Moe came in from Founders as president of the organization. So there's some new blood in the leadership. John did an insane job of getting this organization off the ground and through its first 10 years. But there's just a lot of excitement within that group. We have funds collected for research. Tom Nielsen from Sierra Nevada leads our technical group. So you've got this rock solid scientist in the driver's seat on a lot of our technical matters.
And this is a means by which, brewers can say address questions like, are hops kilning temperatures and reduced kilning temperatures, leading to other effects like hops creep in the brew house, a way for these kinds of, ways for brewers to communicate directly with the industry in a scientific means of trying to think through and come up with some, theories, test them, and then, come up with some additional actions. I mean, what is that? What are the rails for the Hops Quality Group?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been HRC, Hop Research Institute, that does most of the driving for the hop industry on, anything from, new pesticides, oversight of some breeding stuff. That's always been there, and Hop Quality Group is in no way trying to replace or duplicate that activity. Hop Growers, or Hop Quality Group, excuse me, if that's what I'm talking about, was solely born out of There were a few of us who realized, especially after Anheuser-Busch traded hands, that most of the people that were out working with the brokers, working with the farmers, were from the big leagues of brewing and were supporting the needs of very large breweries. And that craft really didn't have much of a seat at the table in terms of communicating with growers. And for that matter, maybe we just lacked a lot of knowledge. So a lot of us, we formed together, one, to communicate the needs specifically of craft brewers, which initially was, oils over alpha, kind of was our motto, quality driven, really hoping that sanitation practices were good because these hops were going to go in as dry hops into cold finished beer, not into the boiling kettle. And that's what it was born out of. And then as we progressed, yes, we started looking at things like kilning temperatures. No two farms maybe were doing exactly the same. That can be okay if the end we get to the same point. But yeah, maybe that one we could have shot ourselves in the foot a little bit because we were really pushing hard to lower kiln temperatures, which has happened, has trended down. And I think you could rightfully say that hop creep kind of followed right behind it. It became a little bit more of an issue. So
thanks, Hops Quality Group.
Yeah.
No, I think on, taking the long view, we can deal with hops creep in exchange for more flavorful hops that excite drinkers out there and give brewers more crayons to color with.
Well, I think what was so interesting that came out of that is that farmers reacted, and when new kilns are built, a lot of that capability is built in, and just that growers are so willing to respond to brewers' needs is pretty cool. I think that witnessing that alone was really cool.
Watching this whole feedback loop close, between the agricultural side of beer and the brewing side of beer has been just one of the most incredible stories of the last decade. Whether it's happening on the hop side, whether it's happening on the barley side, that the pieces getting closer together, of being more of a dialogue than a order off the sheet, or look at the specs and use what we can get, of brewers being involved in the process of creating these things and helping the agricultural side develop. It's hard to understate just how important all of that, kind of connection and close loop really is for the experience that people have making beer and drinking beer today.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those elements that's core to our business as artisanal craft producers. It's funny, like once you can't be in this business for very long before you realize, you start meeting a lot of farmers, and then you start realizing like how important those relationships are. And then as soon as you think you know a little bit about it, you realize you know nothing. And here I am, still just fascinated by all of it. And I feel like I've immersed myself in the hop world, no doubt. I feel like I know a couple things there. I got a lot of things to learn. And now I need to like kind of refocus some of my time and efforts on barley and malt. There's a whole nother world. And back to the European experience, I got to spend some time at some malt houses in Europe, and certainly was working with a whole different kit of ingredients. And there were more questions than answers. It was just, I kind of got pushed back a little bit, like, wow, where's all this stuff been? Not specifically to maybe specific tools, but and I probably can't speak too specifically, but barleys that behave completely different in a brew house than what I'm used to. Lower diastatic power, different protein matrices, malts that just convert completely differently. One example of this was, and when I went to SIBO, we practiced, in every brewery I've been in, we've always had the ability to do these step mashes, right? So, if you want to do a protein rest or a beta glucan rest for whatever reason to free up the lauter ton, but, here's your conversion window. And, in this school we start at 145 Fahrenheit, and that's where you start your beta amylase, and on and on and on. And never in any of my SIBO books, and I probably need to go back and confirm this, but nobody ever talked about this 72C rest. And I was brewing with Freddie, who was one of the veterans at Duvel, and I was struggling with a really heavy wheat and Pilsner malt mash. I could not get this thing to convert, and I was sitting up like, in my normal regular sack program doing my iodine test. Like, man, I'm feeling like an idiot here. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I got the wrong iodine kit. And Freddie just looks at me like, you didn't do your 72 rest, bro. You got to do that. And as soon as I hit ding 72, everything cleared up, done. I'm like, okay, I've been brewing this long. It took me brewing with you, Freddie, to figure this one out. And it was very specific to their malts and everything, but it was just like kind of one of those moments like, wow, there's always something to learn.
It's such an interesting kind of contextual piece that your ingredients could even change a mash regimen to that kind of degree. That's absolutely fascinating. ABS Commercial is excited to be a part of today's podcast. ABS is a full brewery outfitter offering brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts. As a part of ABS Commercial's ongoing Give Back campaign, they'll be giving away an ABS Keg Viking keg washer this June. So make sure to periodically check the ABS Commercial Facebook page to find out when the contest opens up and how you can enter to win a Keg Viking. Are there any other, kinds of stories about ingredients that behaved differently in European origin ingredients? That you had to change some processes around?
Well, I got a couple I guess I could talk about. And one of the really fascinating things that we did on the pilot plant at Duvel that I at least hadn't experienced before was working with malted rice and attempting 100% rice brews, but going through a full conversion and everything in the malt mash mixer, couple interesting pieces there. All the positives of rice hulls are like amplified in a 100% rice, malted rice mash. That was really cool to see. It just ran off like nobody's business. It was just crazy.
Yeah.
That material doesn't necessarily want to go through a standard grain out pump, we found as well. So I ended up digging that one out. But so some new materials that I hadn't worked with before that maybe weren't, Belgium specific, but things that we were looking at. And then, I think, there's always like an interesting different toolbox depending on whatever country you go to. And of course, Belgians are, it's well known, like spices, orange peel and coriander in just about every brewery, especially if they're making wit. Different Belgian, candy sugars. You see those on the shelves everywhere you go, and certainly were employed in a lot of this, kind of classic beers. Nothing that you hadn't heard before, but it's fun to watch it
Sure.
being used in those breweries as it was.
Well, I think, whenever you end up in a place that uses ingredients in such a significant way, you also find that those ingredients get stratified out in different ways too. That in the same way that Eskimos have X number of words for ice, you find that coriander isn't just coriander, and orange peel isn't just orange peel when everyone is trying to differentiate and use them in different ways. Did you find differences and nuances and approaches to some of those same core ingredients there that might differ from the way we look at it here?
Yeah, I think so. But the other side of that is not everybody was telling their secrets. So,
Sure.
I learned what was going on in the Duvel world, but I can't really say how it compares to the other breweries around.
Fair enough. There's not quite the same culture of openness and sharing and the rising tide and all of that.
Right. Yeah. There is an element. I kept referring to it as this kind of Belgian magic that there's some little special tricks that you wouldn't normally hear about being employed. I don't know that I can repeat them all, but
just give me one. Just give us one trick.
Well, I think it's well documented that probably in Europe, Tetra, which is synthesized either from iso or alpha acids, but is light stable, but also enhances foam, is used a lot, mainly in throughout Europe. Maybe not in Germany as much, but because foam is so important to the presentation of beer. And literally, if you're sitting in a cafe in Belgium and you're served a beer with no foam, most people will just send it back. Like, that's an indicator of quality, something that we're not as focused on here in the States. There's a few tricks out there to ensure that there's always good lacing and foam on a beer. You can put foam on a glass of water if you needed to. So.
Well, it is maybe has been an underappreciated piece in the United States, as people seem to focus on quantity of beer in their glass more so than the quality of that foam. And we've made that nasty trade off just so that people don't feel like they're getting shorted. Um, but I do think, there has been a movement of the last number of years to reinforce the importance of that kind of presentation.
Yeah,
In the
maybe
United States too.
Instagram, is a good thing in that regard because, a beautiful looking beer is just, gosh, it's the best thing, right?
For sure. But now on Instagram, your beautiful looking beer is an American sour fruited beer that's blue. And
Blue and Chody.
That's another subject altogether. Let's not get into that.
Well, I don't
thing.
make those, so I can't help you there.
There you go. There you go. Let's talk about. I want to pick your brain for a little while on hops. At our brewers retreat, one of the things that always stuck out to me was when you would sit down with a small group of home brewers and start rubbing hops. You were able to kind of talk about how to smell, how to evaluate. How to approach these from a sensory perspective. And I think that, that's a particular skill that you offer the world. Looking at it, and explaining your process for evaluating hops, how would you describe it? And what do you think, what goes through your head as you say, grab a sample of a new hop? What are the steps that you take to dig through that to help try to understand it?
I don't think there's any crazy secrets or weird science to it. Most of it's experience and, developing a lexicon or developing the descriptors that at least your team that you're doing any kind of selection or, qualifying of hops, will understand. So we work hard as a group, and most of that's just going out and selecting together and or looking at hops collectively at the brewery. I think what I was trying to tell the homebrewers that we were working with at that retreat was, every time you open up a bag of grain, every time you open up a bag of hops, you should, choose some of the grain. It'll tell you a lot. Look at it. Same with your hops. Look at it. Right away, you're going to see, is there some kind of pest situation going on? Is the malt kind of chewy and not crisp and clean? Is there any kind of musty character? These are just like the simple things because, it's been said a million times, crap in, crap out. Without like really good raw materials, you're not going to make a great beer. You can't like convert it into a great beer somehow magically in the kettle by boiling it off or something, But I mean, going a little bit further, when we start looking at brew day, or let's say we're trying to formulate a dry hop for a new luponic distortion or something like that. We're just really going into the hop closet, checking lots, making sure it lines up with what we thought we got from selection, and getting them out on the table, grinding pellets and getting them under everybody's nose and people describing what they're smelling, because likely a good amount of that, right, is going to make it to the finished beer. And I'm sure you've talked exhaustively with brewers about how you can't really smell a hop and know exactly what the beer is going to taste like. But with some experience, there's definitely some things. And oftentimes it's maybe selecting away from things that just aren't going to work. This kind of classic freezer burn, I always call it just pellety character. Like you open up a bag of hops and it smells a little alfalfa and pellety like, it's probably not going to make a great brew, a great dry hop. And that maybe needs to go to the brew house. And so, we're selecting around things that probably aren't going to work well for us, really focusing on the hops that really pop and have, just good, clean, beautiful flavors, and then try to build around those. So, that's what's been great about luponic distortion, is that it's really allowed us to kind of repetitively go through this process of designing new dry hops that aren't necessarily trying to flavor match an existing brand. And in doing so, we learn a lot about new hops that we might make new beers with. Getting a little bit away from that, I guess, but one thing that's been a big help for us, and I think any brewer could do this with just simple kegs or small brewing equipment. We bought, I think, something like 8 of these 1 hectoliter conical homebrew fermenters. And we plumbed them up to glycol here in the brewery, got temperature control on them. But the main purpose of it was to be able to take a single beer, and usually it's like mid-ferm or right towards the end of fermentation. We'll grab it off a big fermenter, bring it over to the set of 8, separate out, and get the exact same what was the same wort now is the same beer in 8 tanks, and hit each one with a different hopping regimen so we can taste them all at the exact same time, and get a real feel for what, if we're just looking at different hops or hops at different rates or different hop blends. And we can really rapidly generate a lot of data. We also have the benefit of having a GCMS, an analytical chemist in-house, so we can also do some analytical work and log this stuff at a little more advanced level. But just the sensory part of that, which any brewer can do, is just so powerful. Now, of course, it takes a lot of time. It takes reproducibility. It took us a little while to make a good beer on a small tank, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But once we got there, man, it's powerful. And so we do this almost weekly. That we're just tasting these little batches and just constantly reminding ourselves, like, okay, we rubbed that hop. Now we made a beer with it. Wow, okay, like that. Better than expected. Ooh, shit, that's no good. That's not going in the next beer, kind of thing. And what that's led me to, and might be counter to what a lot of other brewers have, is like we actually have a harder time integrating high percentages of hops like Citra and Mosaic into our beers. Like we're probably one of those rare West Coast IPA brewers that Citra is not even like a major deal on our. I sell more Citra to Duvel to make Duvel triple hop than I use in this brewery, if that tells you anything. So. And I'm sure there's some brewers going, what? This guy can't use Citra. What is, get the training wheels off, buddy. But I mean, it's more about the pungency and, the need for great selection of that hop. And I think over time, we've just found that rather it being like the main player, because everybody else's beer kind of tastes and smells that way, it's found its way into more of a niche of enhancing, amplifying, not being the star in the thing there. So.
Well, God bless you for that. No, it's such a funny thing. Like, maybe this is just, this is 100% anecdotal, but I was just having a conversation with a brewer friend in Chicago the other day, and that came up. Like, I was thinking about, as I was drinking through a variety of their IPAs, I was increasingly drawn to the non-Citra IPAs, and I think that there's just something that's so obvious and sweet now about Citra, where it's too easy, that it's too obvious and apparent. And, I just find I personally am so drawn to Nelson Sauvin, I think for that reason, because it's an interesting, challenging hop. It's in the same way that like, I don't love pop music, but I love like noise rock bands where where it's not immediately pleasurable and you have to find some way to build meaning out of it. And
right.
I'm attracted to that. But it's interesting that that you say that same kind of thing, that Citra is just, it's just a little too common and doesn't quite give you the different characters.
And so then, and we're not the first to try this or whatever, but I think what we're practicing more with hops like that have such a, they're so common throughout, is using those as more mid-firm or late-firm hops where you get some yeast activity on them. And then they really start kind of changing, and maybe your yeast has a more specific stroke there that comes out a little more unique in the end and maybe softens up those hops or integrates them a little bit better. I think there's a lot to that. And maybe it is maybe just trying to be different now that you mention it. It's just like Rob from Thornbridge has a great one. I think I can repeat it. He's like, oh, since the advent of mosaic hops, any Muppet can make an IPA.
If you use Citra as this kind of accent note, what generally, like how much in a percentage wise would that make up, of a hop spill in the dry hop, just to kind of add that? You almost could think of Citra like, using vanilla in a fruit beer.
Oh, yeah.
in small amounts, just to add that little extra softness and that little extra, kind of appearance of sweetness that helps highlight certain characters without it being a dominant primary note.
Yeah.
For you, what's that accent level for Citra? It's
definitely less than 20%. It's probably in that 10 to 15 range. I mean, I'm just thinking about like Union Jack, which, now is, old school West Coast IPA probably at this point, and all of that, but it does
Union Jack's old school. That makes me really, really old, and so let's not talk about that.
Okay, well, we haven't really altered that beer to be like kind of like the progressive, lower bitter, beer, right. And we've tried to keep the dry hop pretty similar. But in any case, there's probably about a 10-15% Citra addition in that beer, and always has been as long as we've had Citra available. There's also some Amarillo in that beer, which in its day was like, ooh, new school dry hop. And now it's like yesterday's news. I think that beer was developed in 2007. So it's been with us for a long time.
Let's talk about some newer hops varieties. Obviously, you are an influential brewer, and as new hops are coming out and experimental hops, folks love to share their stuff with you. And so I know you've got some experience testing, rubbing, smelling, brewing with, bench testing, etc. with some new, forthcoming, or recently released hops. Talk to me about some of the more interesting characters that you found over the past year or two, and what you find interesting about those.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to mention anything that you haven't already heard.
How do you know what we've already heard, Matt?
I listen to some of the podcasts. You talk to everybody, man.
Well, apparently not to you until now, but yeah, I guess I should have. Yeah.
No, I mean, just like everyone else, I mean, people drop some experimentals here and we play with them. But I am going to say, I think, in terms of things that have found their way all the way up to the production level at this point, Nectaron out of New Zealand, I'm sure you've heard about that one.
Sure.
Yeah, for us, at least, the lot that we received, it wasn't just that ultimate stroke of Southern Hemisphere Sauv Blanc, Nelson-esque. It lays in there somewhere with, between it and maybe, I'm just going to pull one on my hat, but maybe shifts it a little more towards Mosaic and its soft fruit character. But we really like it. And the next Luponic Distortion will have a large portion of that. Gosh, you kind of got me stumped here because, all of them are going to be the ones you already heard about, Talus and some of these others that we're starting to integrate into production brews.
It doesn't, but let's not just talk about, what it is. When you taste and rub something like Talus, what is your internal, what are the descriptors that you create for that? And how do you think about the flavors that hop might bring to it? Strata would be another one. How do you think about, some of these, the way that these flavors are? And then in some of your working with them so far, how do you find that they bring different characters out of different hops?
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I would say that when we're putting these hops on the table and we're starting to kind of lay into where they might fit in the program and, what are we going to get out of them, there's always these, what I would call like sulfur/thiol driven hops. They may be a little aggressive at first rub and also pretty aggressive in beer, but there's a lot of flavor potential. They're the punchy ones. And Citra was one of those, early on, like when you first smell your first Citra, you're like, whoa, okay, that's different than everything else. And that may be largely due to thiols. It's also due to just really high oil content. So you have those punchy hops. I think what we've been gravitating to more recently, and again, it's an older school hop, but the hops in and around that family of like Cashmere as the public cultivar example, and maybe others that play in that spectrum would be Eldorado. I think that, those to me have a little more of that peachy stone fruit. There's tropical elements, but, I always say soft fruit and everybody's like, what are you talking about, soft fruit? But it's a softer hand. And for me, that's what a hazy IPA is all about. So Mind Haze has a lot of those types of hops. Whereas Azacca might move a little bit more towards the punchy side of the spectrum because it's got a little more of that pineapple and probably a little more thiol-driven characteristics, but it still plays a little softer than some of those others, and I think can find its way into that fruit salad basket again. I maybe it's only because it's so near and dear to my heart. I just love the hops coming out of Germany, and maybe it's largely because of the relationships I've made there and the people I know, and just they're these small farms, and it's just such a cool growing community. But I still have a soft place in my heart for the Mandarina Bavaria, the Hallertau Blancs, the melon. I think over time that melon is starting to edge its way towards the pungency of American hops and delivering some of that soft fruit, I can work well in a hazy IPA as well. Look at me kind of hop. But they'll never be as punchy as the US hops. And I think it takes a lot of patience for a brewer to figure out how to coax the characters out of those hops. But the bonus there is there's far less competition to get your hands on those hops. There's not brewers clamoring for selection. So there's some really good lots out there in the world. And then in the German processing time, and this is something that we've been looking at more closely, and I still haven't cracked this one yet, but I feel like those hops, when they go through the pelleting process, could gain from a T45 or a concentrating of the pellet. So maybe that melon or that Blanc isn't as punchy as a T90, but maybe if we can concentrate it, pick it at the right time, get it to the processing plant quickly, get it in that concentrated form, that we might have something. We worked pretty hard on that the last couple of years, and I'm going to say we haven't cracked the code. We've got some good stuff, and we have some stuff that's not performing as well as we'd like to for as hard as we worked for it. But I think there's a lot there as well that plays in that same family. You may have heard that from other brewers as well. Mandarina Bavaria has found its way pretty large into our program.
Yeah.
We buy a lot of it. And it's not the top note in any case, but it's a great supporting cast member. And I think Blanc plays there as well. I think Blanc can support some Southern Hemisphere character if you really use it properly.
What does doing it the right way really mean?
Well, that's a good question. And I think that's something that we've always worked on. The German cultivars, I think, if anything, have a tendency towards that pellety, slightly vegetative character. So you can't just go heavy-handed or go twice as much to get twice the punch. I think you have to work on coaxing it out a little bit more. So I think that our best examples are blends. Although I think we're getting better at single hopping with Mandarina and Blanc and Melon. And I think I've seen, maybe I mentioned this, but I think over time I've seen kind of Mandarina fall into its groove. There's enough people growing it, and there's some just excellent quality out there. I think I've seen Melon really come into its own. I think if you tried that hop 3 years ago and were like, nah, you should try it again. And I also think that, this is another one of those cases where selection is going to make a big difference. Maybe everybody knows this out there, but it bears repeating in that here in the United States, 100% of the crop is under irrigation in Yakima, I should say, probably almost 100% of it in Oregon. And 100% or 99% of the crop is going into refrigerated bale storage after harvest. It's not sitting out on the farm. There's still a tradition in Germany where, less than or maybe 50%, if we're lucky, of the crop is under irrigation. And there's about enough capacity for 50% of the crop in refrigeration. And there's a tradition to hold bales on the farm a little bit longer until the brokers can come and pick them up. And I think that's where it gets important to really communicate your needs and try to drive that quality message with your merchant and spend a little bit of time out there and familiarize yourself with, which is the fun part. I think back to Hot Quality Group, I think, it's a daunting task. I don't think we've accomplished everything we wanted to accomplish in the United States, or more importantly, learned everything that we wanted to learn. But we do have an initiative to branch out and start interfacing a little bit more internationally. And I think Germany is going to be one of those interesting growing regions where here in the United States, there's 75 to 90 core growers that, you could put on a couple year calendar and pretty much see them all. There's over 1,500, or there's close to 1,500 growers in Germany, and they're spread all over the place, and they're super small farms, and not everybody speaks the same language. So that's a little more of a daunting task. And the last thing we want to do is go blasting in there trying to tell people how to do their business. I think it's going to take us a little bit of time to get over there, get a lay of the land, and start encouraging what, again, craft brewers are looking for to drive towards a hop that works really well for dry hopping.
Sure. In terms of, the broader industry, having multiple growing regions that are all growing hops that modern brewers want to use becomes a good insurance policy Are there evolving areas of hops growing that are on your radar in terms of improving quality of hops, of improving volume of hops, of doing some interesting things and providing some different opportunities? Our traditional hops growing areas, we're familiar with, but at this point, given the price of these crops and how prized they are by so many brewers, there has to be interest in every place where growing can be done efficiently and cost effectively.
Yeah, I mean, the Northwest is king here in the United States, and of course, there's expanding acres in Idaho in recent years, and by the way, some incredible quality. A hop we didn't mention earlier was Idaho 7 and now Idaho Gem, which I think are both great hops. We've integrated a lot of Idaho 7 into our program. So I think there's room to grow there. I think that, Michigan's one of those other states that has taken it pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Their total acreage might not, rival the Pacific Northwest, but it's a nice differentiating piece. And I think the more that they have breeding programs that create some point of differentiation, not just terroir, but genetics that work really well there. I think if those growers stick with it, there's going to be something really significantly interesting. Not that hasn't already happened. I think Michigan Chinooks are very different from Northwest Chinooks, and that's a real cool thing. And cashmere grows so well in Michigan, so I think that's really one to keep an eye on. And then there's little things like, a little bit of Saaz being grown, in Germany, and some Amarillo being grown in Germany. I think that's pretty interesting, especially if some of these other hops will grow in, that far away from their homeland. That's real diversification there. What you're talking about is like there's enough alpha for everyone, but I think what craft brewers thrive on is the fact that New Zealand hops taste different and smell different than hops grown in Tasmania that
Sure.
grown in Tettnang, grown in Hallertau, etc. So,
And those even the Michigan Cascades have that like awesome like strawberry kind of like it's just a totally different kind of character that's also really fun to work into beers, and it's fun as a drinker to taste that kind of thing and be able to enjoy it. I was just curious because I imagine that I am not as familiar with it, but there's got to be other places in this globe where folks are thinking, oh, we could probably grow some hops here.
yeah, and the key in the long run would be that those new growing areas develop their own breeding programs, right? And then they have something that's
Right.
specific to their area that's going to grow and produce really well, and also have a signature about it as well. So, yeah.
It is fascinating to watch hops become this, it's so similar to wine grapes and where location and terroir and growing conditions and weather patterns and everything, soil conditions, have such an effect on them and, have massive expressions even in the very flavor of those things, which has significant impacts then in how they work with the downstream product of beer that you actually make with them.
Yep, absolutely. And it's cool to see the growers in those different areas rise to the challenge of growing whatever the popular hop of the day is in their region and doing well. Here, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but the Cascade Cup this year was perfectly split. Third, second, first place. We had Idaho, we had Washington, and Oregon all represented in the top 3 of the Cascade Cup this year, and that's pretty cool to see that like great Cascades can be grown in each region. If you were sitting at the table rubbing those Cascades, yeah, you would sense the little nuanced differences. Oregon happened to be the top this year, but. And we love the Cascade Cup because it's this interesting challenge, not so dissimilar from a brewing competition like GABF, where a little friendly competition, I think, drives some, a little extra effort, some energy, some curiosity. When we're doing the Cascade Cup in person at one of the HGA conventions, the growers can then smell the winning hop, so they actually can rub what the brewers chose. And mind you, this was the brewers who chose the hops, not the hop growers themselves. And we can align our notion of quality and the things that we want. So it's pretty cool.
That's interesting that it just kind of helps those growers get into your brewing minds and understand, those exact characters and the exact nuances and, and kind of pieces of that help that decision making on your standpoint. Because you as a brewer, you're like you get that feedback from your customers. Like they'll tell you on Untapped, they'll tell you with consumer purchases at retail, you have IRI data and you have Untapped scores, and you can kind of triangulate and kind of figure out what's what. But hops growers really just don't have that kind of direct feedback loop other than what you tell them. Is there some sort of feedback mechanism to say, hey, see what you can do to push away from this? And maybe there isn't much that the growers can really do on their end to change some of the way that those flavors express in their hops.
Well, I mean, all the things that you already know. I mean, picking window is a major one, of course. I would say that the most powerful mechanism for feedback would probably be more at the merchant level, and there's more and more sophisticated labs, at the merchant and distribution level, and there are even farms now that have pretty sophisticated labs on site. And I'm always happy to see when there's more and more information provided. Now it's, maybe it's the brewer's job to then look at what we have to work with data wise and, give some feedback to like, this is meaningful for me. This other stuff isn't. And again, back to what Hop Quality Group is driving for, and participation at HGA is just trying to like do as much of that communicating as we possibly can. We might not all know all the answers. It's just, it's an ongoing progressive conversation of quality. And, again, I think over the last 10 years, we've really made some great improvements in that communication. And as a result, we've had just some of the best hops we've ever had to work with. It's amazing.
Sure.
It's like, if we were going back in time, I remember like trying to design, for instance, like Goose Island IPA back in the 90s. And I didn't know where those hops came from. And, I don't even know if they're putting the date, the harvest date on the boxes back then. It was like, we were really in the dark. And, we could stick our nose in a bag of hops and try to tell if it was going to be good dry hops. But it was really the roll of the dice. And we were really relying heavily on just, a little bit of luck and hopefully that we were getting the fresh hops from our merchant. And, we were storing them right. I mean, there were just so many question marks and so much unknown that I'm surprised we were making half as good of beers as we were back then,
Our technical ability increases in concert and in a way that's connected to our discernment. And so, as brewers got better at figuring some of those things out and, selecting lots that hit certain notes, and as growers got better at delivering those, developed better processes to maintain some of those flavors, and we were able to express those things, like those got better. But then at the same time, our ability to discern good from bad tracked right ahead of that. And it always, they always seem to move together. And so we're now at this point where our ability, 10 or 15 or 20 years later to maintain those qualities in hops, develop, push, accentuate, highlight, amplify, are through the roof relative to where they used to be. But also our ability to discern minuter, smaller and smaller, tinier and tinier differences in quality has also increased to that same kind of point. And both of those things move together so that we never achieve this point where we're really happy. You never achieve that point where you're like, oh, now we've really hit it. All you simply do is develop a language that allows you to more discreetly and more finitely break down what you like and don't like. And so you just have, developed more and more granular ways of digging into the small pieces there. So the fun part about it is we're never going to be satisfied,
This is so true. But I mean, that's what keeps us in this game, right? It's just, the endless pursuit of the perfect beer that's just out of grasp.
And that it will always be a pursuit. We will never achieve it. It's absolutely, I mean, that it's kind of a fun and awesome thing to wrap your head around. But we've been talking about hops for a long time, which I appreciate you talking to me about because again, I love your perspective on this. But I think we should, probably broaden the conversation a little bit before we wrap up here and talk about, like we said earlier, you've got 25th anniversary for Firestone Walker. The brewery's brewery's gone through a number of stages while you've been with the brewery. Why don't we just take a historical look back and think about some of those pivotal moments over that history, what they meant for you professionally, what they meant for you as a brewer, some of the products that and the beers that you developed that you're particularly proud of, that you thought spoke to whether it's a moment in time or what the brewery's vision really was, and what are some of those kind of key moments along the way for Firestone Walker?
Well, I don't know how much time you have, so we'll
this
dig into it. It's been a long 25
part 2 of the podcast. 20,
yeah. Okay. 25-year road. But no, I can kind of
what are the
highlights? Some of the highlights. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the brewery starting in 1996 in the age of amber ales, and with an English owner in the ranks. So DBA was the flagship, the original beer. Gorgeous beer, English bitter / English pale ale. And the real differentiator there was fermented in oak barrels, which is something we still do today. That was the beer that carried the brewery forward, and was our best selling beer until probably 2004, 2005. So for the first 10 years almost of the brewery's existence, DBA, and it was mostly draft beer, drunk here in the Central Coast. And that was really our world, 3 counties, 1 distributor, mostly draft, just a really focused local following. And there weren't a lot of other breweries in the Central Coast. So we were really we were it. I came on board after 5 years of DBA, and my first job was to formulate a more hop forward or West Coast style pale ale. I came out of the Midwest, but coming from Goose Island, we had done some dry hopping. I mentioned that, and so Pale 31 was born, and that was maybe the first step towards kind of our hop forward beer profile, should say portfolio that we have. And then we just kept kind of, slogging along. We were getting a little bit out into LA and Northern California, but really, again, our core market was the Central Coast, always has been. And it wasn't until 2006, 2007 that we released our first IPA. Mind you, this is a brewery, right on the west coast of California, right in the epicenter of hoppy beer brewing between Sierra Nevada, Anchor, Stone to our south. I mean, completely surrounded by hoppy breweries. And we waited 10 years to release an IPA, and that was Union Jack. And that was really a game changer. Union Jack then became the number 1 selling beer of the brewery. And that led us to Double Jack and Wookie Jack and some of these other beers.
Cheers to Wookie Jack. I'm drinking some right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm drinking as well. So, and then, things started to change. I think for our 10th anniversary, another pivotal moment was when we released our first barrel-aged beer. And oddly enough, having worked for Greg Hall, and I give so much credit to Greg Hall for getting me started in craft brewing, gave me my first job, taught me so much, introduced me to so many people. I'd kind of made it a point that I wasn't going to do a barrel aging program because Bourbon County Stout was the original. It was the beer that started kind of that whole thing, and that was Greg's deal. And I was young and wanted to strike out and do my own thing, but I kind of succumbed to the urge, and we started the barrel aging program. And that first anniversary release where we brought winemakers to the brewery, had them create a blend and then release that out to the world. It was a game changer for us. I mean, it didn't rock the world, that year per se, but I think our barrel aging program got us some street cred and connected us with some new beer fans that would have otherwise maybe passed over Firestone and gave us a little more of a national recognition a little bit. Those are the days where, some breweries even led into new markets with their barrel-aged beers. I mean, I remember learning about Founders through their barrel-aged beers, right, and then later falling in love with their sessionable beers. And same with Cigar City. I only knew them for their big beers before I ever was introduced to their other beers. But in any case, barrel programs developed, eventually Jim Crooks, who is our quality manager early on, branched away and did Barrel Works. And we started our kind of wild beer program and barrel age program in Buellton. Yeah, and then roll the clocks forward to 2012, and we released this little beer as kind of a, I don't even know how like well thought out or anything it was, but we released 805. And again, it just ignited this incredible following and almost this like rebirth of our brewery in the Central Coast again. It was like every surfer, every rancher, everybody driving up and down the 101 had an 805 sticker in their back window and had a 12 pack in their fridge. So
it's literally amazing. I remember driving, we were out in California in the craft beer brewing RV in like 2015. And we had gone to, I think we'd seen you in Paso, and we're driving further down to Buellton, and didn't realize just what a phenomenon 805 was. And then we looked over and saw this truck as we were passing it, totally murdered out, blacked out windows, black rim, black tail lights, murdered out. Only thing that you could see on this truck was a little white 805 sticker on the back window. And it's like, you look at that and like, that's a craft beer from Firestone Walker. And the Firestone Walker brand doesn't necessarily matter to that guy driving that truck, but 805 matters to that guy. And, and that was a beautiful phenomenon to see that you could make a craft beer that didn't have to be marketed the way that craft beer had been marketed at that point. It was being marketed because it had this connection to this place. And I mean, in the terms of like craft beer being hyper local, I mean, there you go. It felt relevant to life, and this dude with his blacked out truck driving down the highway, interstate, just had to have an 805 sticker. I'm like, that's, I love that craft beer hits beer nerds, but I also love that craft brewers can also sell beer to audiences that don't need to get wrapped up in varying nuances and politics and everything else, and they can just make something that feels cool. Anyway, and that's a big portion of the beer that you all make these days, right?
Oh yeah, I mean 805 will be 65-70% of our production next year. Man. And behind that now we've released a new beer called Cerveza, which is kind of a lager version, a new beer. It's very much inspired by, south of the border Mexican lager. But, back to the story, I feel like when 805 hit, it was that perfect confluence of right liquid, right time, right marketing, and just a real honest approach to getting this beer out there. And we took it so seriously on the quality side. We built, we doubled our lab power. We took, everything we knew and we pumped it into this simple beer, 805, to ensure that we were always going to deliver on quality. And I think that's what kind of tied me back to my Midwest Siebel roots, where we were just told that, attention to detail, quality, quality, quality. And, I have to admit that I took a lot of, cues from Dan Carey and Spotted Cow. I saw this beer coming from one of the best brewers in the country that resonated with every beer drinker in the state and became a bestseller, not just to craft brew drinkers, but to everyone else who loved beer, just to beer lovers. And, so in some ways, it's like one of my proudest, things that I'm very proud of for our team, that we were able to accomplish that. And it afforded us the ability to continue down the road of innovating in barrels. We never stopped, pumped a bunch of resources and time into Barrel Works, continued to push the envelope on our hoppy beer program. So it's a balancing act, of course. I always say this, that having a beer like 805, I encourage everybody out there who's a brewer to figure out how to get one of these low IBU, low specialty malt, no dry hop beers into your program, because it's the best yeast donor you could ever have. Like all of the house ale yeast harvested in this entire brewery is harvested from 805, brought into the brinks. We never harvest from a dry hop hoppy beer. We only 805 donates it all, and we then can do whatever we want. We can mid-firm dry hop. We can dry, doesn't matter. We're not going to collect yeast out of those tanks. So it affords you a lot of quality yeast when you have a beautiful beer like that in the brewery. And now we have Cerveza, so we have just endless amounts of pure white, beautiful lager yeast as well. So we're in good shape that way. We haven't figured out the hazy yeast trick yet. We're still working on that one.
Sure. I know the brewers out there are wondering, like, where did Pivo fit into this overall history and schedule for Firestone Walker?
Yeah.
And I'm going to use that as a segue to open one and drink one while we.
Nice. Pivo, gosh, honestly, I think that one, I've always loved Pilsner beer. Back when I was in Chicago, I had the honor to brew with the crew at Goose Island Baderbrau Pilsner. I don't know if you remember that beer.
Yeah.
But that was a solid Pilsner beer. Just like now, we always loved lager beer brewing and Pilsners as brewers, but it's a rare opportunity to have a chance to actually sell it out there in the real world. And, Pivo, the inspiration, I've told the story a million times, but rather than it being a true spent a lot of time in Germany, spent a lot of time in the Czech Republic, but the real inspiration came drinking a beer with Agostino from Birrificio Italiano and drinking this Italian-made Pilsner beer that, wasn't the clearest Pilsner, but it had beautiful foam, and oh my gosh, it had amazing noble hop character. And I was just struck when I tasted that beer. And then when I met Ago and he could talk so passionately about making that beer and what it meant to him, I had to go home and make one.
Sure.
And it's not just from Ago, but predominantly he is the inspiration, and then everything that we've learned as we've tasted beers traveling around Germany and all over the world for that matter.
And if folks want to learn more about that, they can go check out the 2020 June-July issue of Craft Beer and Brewing, where you wrote a brewer's perspective on that, and Ago wrote his brewer's perspective on Italian Pills, and they're
so cool.
And they're right next to each other, and so you can get both of those perspectives on it. Thank you for that. So talk to me about the more recent chapters of Firestone Walker. What's exciting you now? Obviously, you launched a hazy IPA, Mind Haze, recently. Well, not recently, but within the last few years. And then what's on the immediate horizon for you?
Yeah, so Mind Haze was released early 2019. So we have 2 full years of production there. And as you might guess, it's now the number 1 IPA in the portfolio and growing faster than just about anything else. Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard it from a number of the people you've interviewed. It wasn't just simple, bring new yeast in, change the dry hops, take the bitterness out. It was quite a process to learn how to make that beer. I took probably as much or more inspiration from, again, German brewers making wheat beers and what goes into making those hazy beers as I did from anything else. But certainly I was inspired by tasting some, just amazing beers on both coasts. I can't remember which it was first, but, everybody's has an aha moment when they taste a heady topper. But, tasting some Alvarado Street beers and some Green Cheek beers and some Highland Park beers here, I think in California really convinced me whoa, okay, I got to do this. So certainly it was an inspired moment. And we took a Firestone approach to it. We're making more of, Mind Haze might be more of a pale ale version of a hazy to most people, even though it's in the 6% alcohol range. But, it's a 3 pound per barrel dry hop, 4 pounds total in the beer. And I mentioned earlier, not a lot of Citra or Mosaic, a lot of Cashmere, Azaka, hops like that, Idaho 7, things like that. But it was a learning curve bringing in this new yeast and getting up to speed with it. I think those yeasts, along with the hops that everyone loves in those beers, are prone to some sulfur notes that you need to learn how to manage. Yeast management's always a big piece of that, keeping the yeast happy. And, as far as what's on the horizon, yes, indeed, we will be releasing Double Mind Haze in 2021. In fact, we just brewed it yesterday.
Nice. Oh man!
And it buggered up the brew house real good. I think Dustin sore today after brewing that beer, but it was fun. And it's funny. I can almost not believe I'm going to say this, but we're playing around with fruited versions as well. And I'm one of those brewers that if you look back at my portfolio over history, there's been very few fruit beers. Obviously, there's been a lot of fruit integrated into the Barrel Works beers. And that's where we probably did the major portion of our learning. I mean, Jim brought that to us through his work, and now trying to integrate it here in Paso. It's a work in progress. Let's just say there's not a finished beer to taste yet, but we're playing around with that a little bit and trying to keep it, that's the challenge, is all fruit, no extract. I think your listeners know more about it than I do, but this is a new challenge that I thought I wasn't going to do. But yeah, it's been kind of fun, kind of chipping away at this one. Cerveza, though, going into like serious lager brewing. I mean, we always did pretty decent sized batches of Pivo, reasonable sized batches of our Helles lager. But when we're brewing 805 Cerveza, we're literally filling some of our biggest fermenters and really learning a lot about lager fermentation on the bigger scale. And it's been an amazing challenge, and I absolutely love it. And 3470, baby. I mean, that yeast is like king, and it works in a big tank just like it does in a little tank, maybe even better. It's been great. Yeah.
Well, it's fun that you can still find new challenges after this many years brewing beer and winning this many medals and everything else that you have. For you as a brewer and for Firestone Walker as a whole, what does success look like?
Great question. I would think first and foremost, a happy team, keeping the family happy. And I'm so proud of the team that we have here. The longevity of the team, people like to stick around. Adam and David can take a huge piece of the credit there. They've just been the kind of bosses you want to work for. Giving a lot of room to be creative and support network around us. So I want to keep that going. I really want to keep that going. And but I think we've turned a lot to like, what is it to turn a brewery over to the next generation? I mean, that's not going to happen anytime soon, but you got to plan well in advance. So, starting to look more at the sustainability of how we do our business. How do we build systems that are robust, that are going to last for a really long time? Bake in the quality program, so that there's just no question that goes forward, which is constantly narrowing the window of acceptability. So then when you slip out, you're still like better than you were 3 years ago. And I think that's kind of that moving forward and planning for the future in a way that when we pass the baton, we're going to be passing a brewery that's as healthy as it was today, on to the next generation. And by the way, Nick Firestone, Adam Firestone's son, has joined the company recently. And so, we have family continuing on. The next generation is here, and he's doing an outstanding job. And it's really fun to have him here.
It's a cool thing to look at building a business like this with the intention of it being multi-generational and standing the test of time. Matt, it's been awesome to talk to you. We could talk about Barrel Works beers. We could talk about barrel-aged beers. I could probably talk, about golden ales and all sorts of other things in more depth. It seems like we've only scratched the surface, even though we've been talking for well over an hour now at this point. So let's just agree to talk at some point, later on in this year and delve into some other subjects just to do it because we can. And then also, later this year, like I said, for all access subscribers, we'll come out and film some courses with you guys across the varying disciplines of Firestone Walker to also help give a little more insight into what you do. But thanks for joining me on the podcast. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Set your compass by Roar North Star Pills. Get higher quality concentrate at lower cost from Old Orchard. Take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of BrewDB, and check the ABS commercial Facebook page to find out how to enter to win a Keg Viking. Of course, if you'd like to support this very podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on the subscribe button, and if you're a pro brewer, consider our new all-access pro subscriptions that combine both of the magazine's exclusive online content and more. Also, access to classes that Matt's going to be doing later on this year. If people want to learn more about Firestone Walker, where do they find you guys, Matt?
Well, I assume you just Google Firestone Walker Brewery. Or 805.
That's probably a good solution. And then 2022 Brewers Retreat, Matt. Let's do it.
Oh man, I'm gonna hold you to that. That would be awesome. I can't wait.
If you insist, then I guess we just have to do it, don't we?
Yes.
Well, awesome. Thanks for talking to me on the podcast, Matt. Really appreciate it. And
Jamie, you do such a good job. So thank you for what you do, and thanks for having me on.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.